to the Make a Mental Note podcast, where mental health professionals share information and perspectives that illuminate, educate, and is worthy of a mental note. And now your host, Chris Quarto.
Hi, everyone. This is Chris Quarto. Welcome again to the Make a Mental Note podcast. Thanks for joining me. Well, today is a fantastic day in Middle Tennessee. The sun is shining and there's nothing to worry about, although I think some of us struggle with worry, and that doesn't exclude kids. Kids and adolescents have their own sets of worries just like adults do. And my mental health tip for today pertains to coping with worry. And I would like to suggest using a worry box. I use this a lot with my adult clients, but it can work with kids as well. That, if you have a child who tends to worry about things, take an old shoebox and cut a hole in the top. And you can even decorate this with, colored paper or whatever you want to do, but have them make a worry box. And every now and then, if you notice that they're worrying about something, have them jot down their worries on a card. Talk to them about what they're worrying about first, but have them maybe jot down that worry on a card. Maybe have them draw a little picture of what they're worrying about on the card, something that represents their worry. You can have them colored if you want. But once that worry card goes in the worry box, you have them put it in the hole in the top of the box. They're not allowed to worry about it anymore at that point. Once it's there, and it's not allowed to come out until they let it come out, if they choose to, that is, and hopefully they won't. But every now and then they might want to take it out to look at it and just kind of reflect on what they were worrying about. But anyway, that gives them a sense of control over their worry, that they're doing something concrete. And that's why this is a real good thing to do with kids. It gives them a concrete activity to do, something that they feel like they can take control over whatever it is that they're worrying about. And anyway, just every now and then maybe open up the box and talk about the worry card with your child, how they're feeling, and maybe talking about ways that they can handle the worry in the future. But anyway, that's my mental health tip for today. Well, today's guest on the Make a Mental Note podcast is Jim Frost. And let's just go ahead and get to the interview. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Chris Quarto, your host of the Make a Mental Note podcast. It's Thursday, and I am really looking forward to the weekend, something that I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to. If you get a chance, just take a walk this weekend without electronics and just enjoy the beauty, the nature. It's something that I think we don't do a lot of, but probably something that we need to do more of for our own mental wellness. Well, my guest today is Jim Frost, who is a licensed senior psychological examiner and the assistant clinical director at Agape in Nashville, Tennessee. And welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Chris. Glad to be here.
Well, if you wouldn't mind to share with the mental note takers a little bit more about you and what types of services that you offer.
Okay, sure. Well, I have a master's degree in psychology. The emphasis is with clinical psychology, and
all right. That
was from Middle Tennessee State University there in Murfreesboro.
Okay.
And as you mentioned, I'm licensed as a senior psychological examiner, and most people don't have any clue what that is.
Okay.
I tell them it's a master's level degree, but it's the scope of practice is probably most like a clinical psychologist.
Uh-huh.
But I always kind of stress that I'm not a psychologist. I don't have that degree or that license.
Okay.
I've done a lot of psychological testing in my career, particularly in the early years, but now I just think of myself as trying to have helpful conversations with people. Mm-hmm. I've been licensed since 1980, and so I've been practicing for 35 years. I like the work very, very much. I enjoy it, and I have been mentored and encouraged by a lot of folks along my road, and I take particular delight when I can mentor and encourage others. I am, after working about 20 years in community mental health, I worked with all kinds of clients, really. I started out specializing with children and adolescents, but then ended up spending a good deal of time working with recovering alcoholics and drug addicts, and In community mental health, at least at the time that I was there, you pretty much worked with whatever client walked in the door. So
yeah, jack of all trades.
I've had a lot of experience with clients with anxiety and depression and relationship problems.
Mm-hmm.
I currently, always have at least one client with a sexual addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of marital counseling. So I really work with all ages. I don't really work with folks who have really active PTSD. That's not something that I have a lot of specialized training or experience with.
All right.
And I don't really work with people who have real serious mental illness who need, usually a broad array of services that I can't provide. But I enjoy the work very much.
Well, tell the audience a little bit about Agape. I had mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, but they might not be familiar with your clinic. So say a little bit more about that.
Sure. Agape is an agency that was established in 1967 in Nashville. It is a faith-based Christian agency. It was established originally. The vision was foster care and adoption. Mm-hmm. And counseling was just sort of a side element that was done with the clients that they served, and then people found out about it. I'm here in the buckle of the Bible Belt, as they say, and so we had a lot of people who came to us and said, well, I want Christian counseling too. So the demand for that service just grew over the decades, and so we now have a pretty sizable staff. We will work with folks of any faith or no faith, but I find probably about 70% of the clients that I see are people who come to me specifically because of what we might call Christian counseling. They want their faith to be, at a minimum, respected and ideally sort of involved and incorporated into the work we do. For a lot of these people, that's a very important part of who they are, and they would like for their counseling to be done with someone who shares that faith.
Yeah, that makes total sense too, and I've seen that too in my practice, where some people really want that integration of the faith, the religion, those things that are very important to them, their values incorporated into counseling, and because that's who they are. I mean, that's a primary part of their identity, and that's a very important element to include in the counseling if that's something that they're looking for. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, but let me just ask you, because you said that you've been in this field for over 30 years now, and what is it that got you into this field? I mean, why did you decide to go into the field of psychology and counseling?
Well, as a teenager, I hated school, and I never planned to go to college. My original vocational plan was to be a rock and roll drummer, and my 15-year-old brain thought that up, and by the time I'd hit 17, I had enough maturity that I decided that wasn't the most realistic path in the world. I happened, the last semester of my high school, I happened to take a psychology course. It looked like an easy A, and my best friend was going to be in the class, and I really knew, I thought psychology had something to do with rats, but that was about as much as I knew about it. And as it turned out, it was the first subject that really engaged me, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I can still hear the first words that came out of the teacher's mouth 40-something years ago. And so I decided this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a therapist, and so I committed, to going to college, even if, that meant going to grad school. And I just never got tired of it. I never got tired of studying it and learning about it. The truth is that I went into the field initially because people fascinate me, human experience fascinates me. Psychology was, for me, one way of understanding my own stuff, my own experience and my own thoughts and feelings. Later, once I sort of had a lot of that curiosity satisfied, then I really developed the love for helping people. But, to be honest, that wasn't what drew me into it. It was, there's a lot of ways to help people, but but now that's what is really rewarding about it, is being able to take all this stuff that I've learned and use it in a way that helps other people.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I think when I talk to other therapists about why they go into the field, I mean, you'll get different reasons, and sometimes the therapist will say, well, when I grew up, I had a lot of problems, and I was really attracted to this field because I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about why I had those problems, why I did the things that I did, and I even benefited from some of the little tips or techniques or whatever that I learned from my readings. And I thought, I think I could do this, help people do the same thing that I did to help myself. And it's a real fascinating thing to hear those stories.
Yeah, and there's an adage that is well known amongst people in this business, and that is that we all went into it to fix ourselves. And I think there's a certain amount of truth to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've been in this field for quite a number of years, and you've seen a lot of people. You've worked with people with addictions and other types of issues. And as you've worked with people, have you found that there are common themes or stories that seem to underlie their problems? What's your take on why people have the problems that they do, Jim?
Well, I think we all grow up sort of wounded in one way or another, or to a greater or lesser degree. And one of the ways that gets manifested is we either take on too much responsibility or we take on too little responsibility. Sometimes I'll take on responsibility for things that I shouldn't, and sometimes I will overlook my responsibility for things that I should feel responsible for. And I see that as a common theme. Long before people come to counseling, they have usually tried to do something to solve their problems, and a lot of times they just persist in doing the same self-defeating things that make things worse rather than better. The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung once said something to the effect that most emotional suffering results from people being unwilling to do the work that is required to really deal with their problems rather than just to avoid them. Or kick the can down the road. And I really find a lot of truth in that.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of times when I have been stuck with clients, I will point out to them, here's what I think you're going to have to do in order to overcome this problem. And I'll have people look at me and say, I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I will say, well, then I think, this is as good as it gets.
Yes.
And I've actually had clients say, okay, well, I'll take it,
Yeah.
Rather than, and, usually you see those people again at some point later down the road. But,
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about understanding yourself is that it helps you have empathy for, there are changes that would be beneficial for me in my life, and yet I am as of yet unwilling to do them.
Yeah.
Whether that's exercise more or eat more healthy or something like that. And so I can have a lot of empathy for people who have trouble making those kinds of changes. I do like to help people see what those are, and it's their choice, but
Mm-hmm.
let's just don't pretend, that something else is the root of the problem.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that when you look at why people have problems, you consider, are they investing so much time in one area, or I think you would use the word responsibility, and just kind of investing a lot of time into that area, and do a lot of other areas, perhaps areas that they should be paying attention to, do those areas fall by the wayside? I think that's what I heard you say. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that an objective person like a therapist can do for folks is to help them look at their problems in new ways, or to see alternatives that they haven't seen. I mean, a lot of times I feel like, my job, so here's, and I do training and supervision with interns and young therapists working towards their license. And one of the little metaphors I teach them is I say, my client is looking for something in the dark, and I hold the flashlight. And so, by using the flashlight, I can kind of direct where they look. And part of what that means to me is where, the questions that I ask, the things that I draw their attention to. I'm not going to just give them the answer. That usually doesn't work. But through that process of helping them look, by shining the flashlight, they'll begin to look at areas of their life or things that they are doing that they hadn't really looked at objectively before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mental note takers, how often have you tried to change something about your behavior and it just hasn't worked? How many times have you kicked that can down the road and it's just not working for you? You wake up the next morning, you have the same problems, and the question is, what is it going to take for you to do something to make that kind of a change? To go talk to somebody about your issues and to make the changes that need to be made. And Jim, a lot of the things that you're talking about today make a lot of sense. I think a lot of people, when they consider going in to talk to a therapist, have concerns about, well, what's going to happen, especially if they've never seen a counselor before. So maybe you could describe to a person who's perhaps considering counseling, who's never been involved before, what's that first session like? What's going to happen in that session?
Well, a first session is, for me, asking a lot of questions. I'm interested in getting to know that person. I'm also interested in getting to know their perspective of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
We do a fairly thorough intake assessment where we ask a lot of questions about background and what your family was like growing up and how long have you had this problem and have you had problems like this before that you were able to overcome. And I usually, a lot of times I feel guilty because at the end of the session, I feel like the client doesn't know anything that they didn't know when they walked in, but I feel like I know a lot more.
Yes.
And yet I've had clients at the end of an intake session say, wow, I see connections that I didn't see before. And you know, I think those of us who are in this field and we consult with our colleagues sometimes on difficult cases, whether that be a supervisor or just a trusted colleague, a lot of times in the telling of my experience with my client, suddenly I see, you know, connections with this client that I didn't see before.
Yes.
So just talking through things for the sake of trying to make another person understand is often very helpful.
Mm-hmm. So you ask a lot of questions in this initial session, and you learn a lot about the client. The client might perhaps learn a lot about himself or herself as well. So you do this session, and then of course counseling involves additional sessions to talk about the problem, to identify, you know, what have they tried before, so on and so forth. And I'm sure over the course of your years that you've had a lot of successes in people that you've worked with. And what do you find to be your recipe for success, Jim, in people that you've helped? They've come in with these big problems that they've had, and you've seen them do some pretty miraculous changes over the course of those therapeutic encounters. What is it that you do that kind of helps a person move from point A to point B?
Well, one of the things I think it's important to say is that a lot of people assume that if you have never been to a therapist before or a counselor, you assume that someone's going to tell you what to do.
Uh-huh.
And counseling really involves not nearly as much advice giving as people might expect. I try to create a helpful relationship, a relationship where that person feels safe to explore their problem and how they've seen it and how they've responded to it, and to create the relationship where they can ask questions that they may have never, dared to ask out loud before.
Mm-hmm.
So my own orientation is that I think the relationship is pretty huge
mm-hmm.
in what works in therapy. At the risk of oversimplifying things, and I'm one of these people who can't see the forest for the trees,
uh-huh.
But I've been influenced a lot by the writing of M. Scott Peck, and I think if listeners out there were looking for a pretty good little pop psychology self-help book, whatever you want to call it, as
mm-hmm.
far as those things go, The Road Less Traveled would be the one that I recommend. It's many years old now,
mm-hmm.
and there's a used bookstore in Nashville that sells them for $0.05, and I go in with $1 and buy a bag full and give them out to clients, and
uh-huh.
sometimes they read them, and sometimes they lead to some very helpful, conversations. But Scott Peck was also influenced by that Carl Jung reference that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes, clients need to learn to listen to and trust their own voice. Sometimes they need to reexamine ideas and beliefs that they've just held on to for years without really questioning them. Both of those things can be pretty hard, and I think changing old habits, whether those are thinking habits or behavioral habits, can be among the most significant challenges in solving our problems. I think it was Bill O'Hanlon, another psychological counselor who's written a lot of books, self-help and otherwise. I think he uses the phrase change the viewing or change the doing. I like that too. So sometimes we have to change the viewing, which gets into how we see and think about ourselves or our problems and the relationship of our problems to other pieces of our life. Sometimes we have to change the doing, which is simply developing new behaviors that break old patterns and cycles and that we've gotten stuck in. And, of course, one of the things that we do is we explore the problem from lots of angles to try to figure out where does the viewing need to change, where does the doing need to change.
Yeah, and I like that word that you used, unstuck, because I think that people get stuck in their problems but yet need to find out ways of getting unstuck. And perhaps this process that you're talking about, the process of looking at the way that they view things, looking at what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, I think that all figures into that whole process, doesn't it, about trying to get unstuck?
Yeah, and that's where having an objective person who will be accepting and a good listener, someone, again, who may see something you don't see or will help you draw your attention to something that you have just overlooked, that's where that person can be really helpful, particularly, when that person is skilled in understanding, problems and how people get themselves into them. But it's another one of those reasons why sometimes a trusted friend, if they're a good listener and not just simply going to tell you to go do this, a trusted friend can be helpful sometimes as well.
Sure. Well, mental note takers, look at yourselves and consider this. How do I view something that might be creating problems for me? What do I assume to be true that may not really be true, but because I think it is, it's creating problems for me? And I think that these are some questions that you can start looking at. Sometimes these are questions you can answer yourselves, but oftentimes these are questions where you need the assistance of a psychologist or a counselor, or for like a senior psychological examiner like Jim to help you look at these things and explore these issues. That's all part of the counseling process. Now, Jim, also I imagine too that in your work, you've come across some pretty challenging clients. I mean, some clients are there wanting to work, they're willing to put in the effort. Other clients, for whatever reasons, may not be quite as easy to work with. Tell the audience a little bit about your experiences working with people like that, and how do you help them?
Well, sometimes it's difficult because people are just so entrenched in the way that they see things that they find it really, really hard to trust that it can be different than the way that they see it. And so I do, one of the things I pride myself in is I do try to have, as I say, a lot of empathy in how difficult it is to make changes. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 1997, and it sort of really changed my work as a therapist because it was the first time that here I'm sitting in the other chair now, and now I'm a patient, and I'm listening to someone tell me what I have to do. And it really increased my empathy for what it's like to sit in the patient's chair. You know? And so I do try to be very interested.
Change is not easy.
No, it's not. And I think probably as a young therapist, I just would probably scratch my head and go, why don't you just do this? But that's when you're I tell people they gave me a degree and a license when I was 25, and I really realize now I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's the case for all of us, and it's a matter of gaining that experience and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I think that people who are looking for therapy, looking at you perhaps as a therapist with all your years of experience, I think would be very attracted to you because of that. And in fact, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is that when you look at people that you work with, or people who are referred to you, is there something about you or the way that you do your work, something unique about you, the services that you offer, that would draw people to you for therapy?
Well, I mentioned before I work with clients of any faith or no faith,
Yeah.
and my counseling is not done with the intention of proselytizing people. I just don't feel that's consistent with the counseling profession. But I do work with a lot of clients of faith, and I love to help people explore their conceptions of God and how they see God in the context of the problems they're experiencing. And a lot of times I find people, their faith grows, their conception of God grows, or changes in some way. For me, I'm always interested in trying to make an impact deeper than just symptom reduction. Now, sometimes clients come and they just make it stop hurting.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, if that's what they want, then that's what they get. But I love it when, and it happens a good bit, when the symptoms go away and the client suddenly realizes, wow, there's something deeper here. I'd like to go further and explore that. And, if that's you, I would love to be the person to work with you.
Yeah. So there's something typically that's creating those symptoms, correct? Something that's happened, whatever the case may be, that's the cause of the symptoms. So it's that old saying, well, do you just treat the symptoms, or do you go beyond that? And what I hear you saying is that it's really good if you can go beyond that with clients, because I think that's really what makes counseling therapeutic. I mean, that's what this field is all about, isn't it?
Sometimes when the symptoms quieten down, people become aware of what else is missing in their life, and then they want to go after it.
Yes.
So,
yeah, that's a very good point. Well, this last part of the interview, I talk about this as make a mental note. It's something that you feel is important for the mental. Make a mental note podcasting audience to make a mental note of themselves in terms of tips, suggestions to improve their own mental wellness, their own well-being or relationships. And what's a tip or a suggestion, some words of wisdom that might help an audience member improve their mental wellness or relationships, even if just a little bit?
Well, I have a favorite generic prescription for clients, and that is to ask them to set aside 15 minutes a day, sit in silence with their eyes closed, and just be open to whatever their experience is. Now, for anybody that's familiar with mindfulness meditation, they'll probably recognize it's a little mini version of that.
All right.
I was given that recommendation 14 years ago by an old priest, an old monk, actually. I was at a monastery for a retreat, and it changed my life, and so I suggested that for a client. And I've had so many clients, those who will try it, have experienced really deep change in their life. And I don't know, exactly how to describe what happens, but I like to think about it as, helping people to just sit still and create some space in their life to become aware of things that usually get drowned out in all the noise of our life. And that may be an awareness of God. It may be just that you're able to hear your own thoughts and your own voice for a change. I've had a lot of clients who, after they do that, on their own begin to think of changes in their life that they want to pursue, and then they go do them. They're often things that I never thought to suggest to them, but they sometimes in that clarity seem to have a better idea of what they need to do to pursue happiness.
Yeah.
So I love to make that recommendation to people.
Yeah, that's a good point that you make about the noise, because boy, there is so much noise nowadays. Noise meaning things that are happening in our lives and that just take up so much of our time, and distractions and all of this kind of stuff. And wouldn't it be great just to take that time on a daily basis, if possible, 10, 15 minutes, just to sit there and just be, and see what happens. And I don't think a lot of us are used to doing something like that, but I think this suggestion is fantastic.
Well, and I want to mention, too, if I may,
yeah,
because what often happens when you get away from all what I call the external noise, then you suddenly become aware of a lot of internal noise. There's a lot of chatter in your mind. And it's very true that some people confront that internal noise and they run away from it and they go back to always having a television or radio on or iPod in their ears or, distracting themselves from themselves, really, with various forms of media and busyness and so forth. And that's, it's scary for some people. But for those people who are able to get in touch with what's inside of them, it can be really life-changing.
And I guess that's one of the things I was thinking about at the beginning of the podcast. I had suggested that this weekend perhaps people take a walk without electronics.
I love that. I love that. Because
I think you see people nowadays, walking and they have the earbuds in their ears and all that kind of stuff. But when was the last time a person took a walk without any of the electronics and just really enjoyed nature and just to be, kind of like what we were just talking about a second ago?
One simple thing that I sometimes ask people to do is just don't turn on the radio during their daily commute. Try that for a week and see what happens.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Jim, if a person wants to talk to you, they're interested in setting up an appointment with you, how can they get a hold of you?
The main phone number for the Agape office in Nashville is 615-781-3000. That would be the best contact. And if you let someone know you're interested in an appointment with me, they'll probably take some information and forward it on to me. If you want to talk to me directly about that, they can get a message to me, and I will get back to you when I can.
That's great. And we'll put that contact information in the show notes, and we'll also put that book, the M. Scott Peck, is that the name of the book, The Road Less Traveled?
The Road Less Traveled.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll put that in the show notes as well in case anybody would like to get a copy of that and read it. It sounds like that's a really good book.
Well, I think a lot of people find it helpful.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for spending time with us today. You've had a lot of great insights. I think there's a lot in this podcast episode that people walk away with that could be very beneficial. So thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Chris. I hope it is helpful.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jim Frost. He brought up some really good points. And as usual, I'd like to find out what you've learned by listening to the interview. And so my question for you is this. Jim made reference to Carl Jung, who said that most emotional suffering results from something. Do you remember what that was? Well, according to Jung, people in emotional turmoil are oftentimes unwilling to do the work that's required of them to deal with their problems, and that avoiding dealing with problems simply perpetuates them. And Jim had talked about this as kicking the can down the road. And so at some point, once a person recognizes that they have a problem, they need to ask themselves this question: what is it going to take for me to do something to solve this problem? And so that's good food for thought. Well, thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If you haven't listened to any of the previous episodes, then I'd encourage you to do that. There's some really good information that other guests have discussed that I think you'd like and find to be of value. Please visit my website, chrisquarto.com, for the show notes of this episode. And once again, my last name is spelled Quarto, think Quart with an O on the end, chrisquarto.com. And if you wouldn't mind, do me a favor and write a one-sentence review of the Make a Mental Note podcast on iTunes to ensure that the podcast series is ranked highly so other people can benefit from it in the future. It's very easy. Just open up your iTunes app, type in Make a Mental Note in the search box, and once you see the podcast icon, the picture of that dude wearing glasses with the words Make a Mental Note in his brain, just click on him to get to the review page. Thanks again and have a great day.